As the carriage left Yorkshire behind, Clara Merritt pulled her suitcase onto her lap and made a list. It was something she did when she was upset or afraid, especially when she didn't want to admit she was afraid. The list consisted of concrete things: what she had with her, where she was going, what she needed to know. What she had: 2 suitcases, 14 books, 8 in her lap, 6 in hand. Her father's small travel inkwell. She hadn't sold it, couldn't sell it. And a modest sum of money she had saved over 18 months. That money came from before Cheltenham, before that house, before Lady Forsyth's cold stare. Where she was going: Bradwell House, near the Yorkshire border, the estate of Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Wexhall. More precisely, to his son, Lord James Ashworth, 27, said to have dreadful French and virtually no Latin. A man who missed London and was wasting away in the countryside. What she needed to know: do her job well. Think about nothing else. That last one was always the hardest. Clara's father, Arthur Merritt, had taught for 20 years in the village of Harsley in Yorkshire. The village had a church, a mill, 42 households, and a schoolhouse that was never quite enough. Arthur heated it with wood in winter, worked in it without proper ventilation in summer, and always told his students the same thing. Knowing words is like carrying a weapon. No one sees it, but you feel safe. Clara had heard that sentence at 8 and understood it at 19. Arthur Merritt had died at 42 of typhus. He had gone to a patient's house, carried the illness back with him, and was gone within 3 weeks. He left behind 2 chests of books, a small debt, and a daughter. The books were not sold. Everything else was sold, but not the books, because Clara refused, at 19, in mourning, with no money at all. A neighbor woman had said, "The girl has gone mad." Clara had heard it and did not care. If words were weapons, these books were an arsenal. What followed should be told quickly, because it passed quickly, or seemed to. A teaching family took her in, not as a servant, but as a governess. 2 years in a small town. Then Cheltenham. Cheltenham. When Clara thought of that word in the carriage, she looked out the window. November marshland, thin trees, gray sky. In the grand house in Cheltenham, she had taught Lord Forsyth's 2 sons Latin and arithmetic. 2 years. Good years. The boys were not clever, but willing, and sometimes that was better. But over time, Lord Forsyth had begun to come into the library, under the pretense of books, then without pretense. Then Lady Forsyth had come to the door, with a cold look and a single sentence: "We will no longer require your services." Clara had not protested, had not defended herself. She had remained silent, because silence had seemed safe. 8 months later, she was still thinking about that silence. Was it truly safe, or merely less costly in that moment? Her father used to say, "Still waters run deep, Clara, but deep waters swallow people too." Lady Ashworth of Bradwell House, Eleanor, in her 60s, with silver hair, had written the hiring letter herself. That was unusual. In most houses, a clerk wrote it, sometimes the housekeeper. But Eleanor Ashworth had written in her own hand, 2 pages, clear and direct. "My son is 27. His French is dreadful, his Latin nearly non-existent. You have been recommended. What are your terms?" Clara had read that letter 3 times when she received it, because there was something unusual in it. The lady's tone. It was neither condescending nor deferential. She was simply speaking, as if stating a problem and looking for a solution. Clara was not used to that tone. She had written back her terms: weekly salary, access to the library, and not a separate room for meals, but the common dining hall. The last point was a provocation, and she knew it. But she wanted an answer. Either she would be refused, or Lady Ashworth truly was different. The reply came within 2 days. All 3 terms were accepted. Beneath them, a single sentence. "We expect you at the beginning of November." As the carriage passed through the iron gates of Bradwell, Clara looked out the window. The house came into view, large but unpretentious. Gray stone, an ivy-covered west wing, asymmetrical windows. It was not beautiful. It looked dignified, and the difference mattered. As Clara stepped down from the carriage, she lifted her head and took in the facade. A 2-story main building, an east wing, a lower west wing. The garden was not neglected, but it had endured winter. Late November leaves had not yet been cleared. The front door looked heavy. Before it opened, in that brief moment, Clara straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. This time, you will not stay silent. At the same moment, James Ashworth stood at the window of his study on the 2nd floor, watching the carriage. He had been at Bradwell for 8 weeks, at his mother's decision in his mother's manner, which meant very gentle and very final. "London is not good for you, James. You will go to Bradwell, get some air." Getting air, riding, dull country dinners, tedious luncheons with neighboring landowners. And now, at the end of the 8th week, a governess. "I am 27, Mother," he had said in London during their last conversation. "Exactly why I am ashamed," she had replied, without setting down her teacup. There had been nothing to say to that. Now he watched the woman step out of the carriage. She was not old. He had not expected that. 24, perhaps 25. Black coat, black hat, a stack of books in her arms. Practical, unadorned. As she walked toward the house, she lifted her head and scanned the facade. Not like an architect, but like a person asking, "Will I settle here? Can I live here?" Then, just before the door opened, in that brief moment, she straightened her shoulders and took a breath. James recognized the gesture. He did it himself, before entering his father's study, before stepping up to the floor in Parliament, before facing his mother's gentle but final sentences. A gesture of preparation, tightening one's armor before entering battle. "What are you preparing for?" he thought, fogging the glass slightly with his breath. For me, it was amusing, but it was also not. And that second feeling lingered longer than the first. Lady Ashworth received her that very evening. In a small sitting room, by the fire, there was tea, which in itself was a gesture. Most houses introduced a governess first to the cook or the housekeeper, not to the lady. Eleanor Ashworth was in her 60s. Her silver hair was neatly arranged. Her hands moved toward the teacup with practiced ease. She looked worn, but not from fatigue, from the kind of wear that comes from standing in the right place for a very long time. The look of someone who had measured every word, entered every room with care, for 40 years. But her eyes were still young, and when she looked at Clara, Clara felt evaluated, not uncomfortably, but honestly. "I knew your father," Lady Ashworth said, stirring her tea, direct, without preface. "Many years ago, my husband commissioned one of his research papers. There was correspondence. He was an intelligent man." Clara's throat tightened. "He was, my lady. It was unfortunate to lose him." She said it like a simple fact, not pity, but acknowledgement. Clara preferred that. Pity was unbearable. Acknowledgement could be endured. Lady Ashworth set down her cup. "My son is an intelligent boy, but lazy and worse, aware of it, which makes him believe effort unnecessary. That will make your task difficult." "I understand, my lady. I am not saying you should not challenge him." Lady Ashworth leaned forward slightly. "On the contrary. No one told you to yield when we hired you. I certainly did not." Clara lay awake a long time that night in her room. She watched the countryside darkness through the window. Unlike London, there were no lights, only faint moonlight slipping through the clouds. She thought, why had Lady Ashworth said that sentence? Was it a warning or permission? The difference was unclear, and Clara did not like uncertainty. But before she fell asleep, she realized something. For the first time, she had not been afraid of her employer's eyes. The first lesson was to begin at 9 the next morning. Clara arranged the table. Stendhal, Le Rouge et le Noir, French edition, a notebook, 2 pens. At 9:05, she was ready. James arrived at 9:25. He entered, did not look at Clara, walked straight to the table, and sat down. He had a newspaper in his hand, the London Times, yesterday's edition. He opened it, looked out the window as if Clara were not there. Clara opened her notebook, prepared her pen, and waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. James turned a page. The sound cut through the room. 3 minutes. Clara waited. She waited well. Cheltenham had taught her that. Waiting was not passive. It was control, just of a different kind. At 4 minutes, James set the newspaper on the table and looked at Clara. For the first time, directly. His eyes were dark brown, his expression not tired but bored. The look of a man exiled to the countryside, now forced to sit with a governess. "Aren't you going to begin?" he said. His voice was polite, but there was a slight edge. A man who knew he was asking something he should not, and asked it anyway. "I am ready," Clara said. "I was waiting for you. I am here." "Yes, now." 2 words. James's jaw tightened slightly. Clara did not continue. Men like him filled silence. If you did not speak, they would. Waiting was enough. James did not speak, but he did not pick up the newspaper either. Clara placed the book on the table. Le Rouge et le Noir. James looked at the cover. He seemed to recognize the name, but it was clear from his face he had not read it. "Read from the first page." Aloud. "Teacher," said James. And the way he said the word was odd, neither dismissive nor respectful, somewhere in between. "I assume no one required honesty as part of your employment." Clara looked at him. She recognized that sentence. She had heard it in different voices, in different forms, but its meaning was always the same. Know your place. Do not forget where you stand. In Cheltenham, she had stayed silent. "True," Clara said, "but no one required me to be dishonest either." "First page, my lord." James paused for a moment. Then he picked up the book. He read. His pronunciation was poor. He mispronounced Verrières 3 different ways, stumbled over Scieries, read Rivière as if it followed English rules. Clara did not correct him, not yet. First, he had to find the rhythm, enter the language. Language settled in the ear before it settled on the tongue. He turned to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. Julian Sorel was entering the town. The sawmills roared, the river flowed. James's voice began to change, less irritated, less deliberate. He was reading, truly reading. On the 5th page, Clara raised her hand. "Stop. Read the 3rd paragraph again." James stopped, turned back, read. "Verrières," said Clara. "Verrières. In French, the final consonants are not pronounced." Again. James repeated it. It wasn't better, but it was different. At least he had paid attention. Again. And again. And again. On the 4th attempt, James said it correctly, not perfectly, but close. Clara nodded and continued. When the lesson ended, James closed the book and set it on the table. He was about to stand. Then he paused. "This man," he said, looking at the cover. "Julien, a peasant, the son of a carpenter, and he enters the house of the richest man in town." Yes. James thought about this for a moment. Then he stood. But as he walked toward the door, he left the newspaper on the table. Clara noticed. She said nothing. At the end of the third week, on Thursday evening, as Clara sat at the writing desk, Lady Ashworth entered. She did not close the door. That meant she would not stay. "How is it going?" she asked. "Well, my lady, he learns quickly, even if he appears unwilling." Lady Ashworth smiled faintly. "Reluctance is his armor. The inside is different." She paused and then added, as if releasing a thought she had been holding, "We are expecting guests for Christmas this year. It will be crowded. They are coming from Northumberland as well. Count Vane and his family." Clara did not put down her pen. "I understand, my lady." "Lady Caroline is a very graceful young woman." Lady Ashworth said it evenly, neither emphasizing nor dismissing it. "She and James have met before, in London, once or twice." Now Clara set down her pen. She looked at Lady Ashworth. Lady Ashworth was looking at her, with that same evaluating, honest gaze. The silence was brief. "I understand," Clara said. "Good," said Lady Ashworth, and left. Clara turned back to the window. Outside, the November wind stirred the ivy. The leaves had long fallen. The branches were bare and clean. She thought, Lady Caroline Vane, the Count's daughter. Graceful. Then she stopped thinking, or tried to. Those were not the same thing. That night, James came down to the library. This was no longer unexpected. Since the second week he had been coming from time to time. The excuses changed, but he did not. Tonight he had a letter in his hand, open, already read. Clara lifted her head from her book. "We have guests for Christmas," James said, placing the letter on the table. "My mother wrote." "I know." James paused. "She told you?" "This evening." James looked at the letter, then at Clara. He wanted to say something. Clara could see that. But he did not know what, or he knew and chose not to say it. The difference was unclear. "Have you finished Stendhal?" he asked at last. Clara looked at him. It was an evasion, and they both knew it. "No," Clara said. "We will continue where you left off tomorrow." James nodded. He did not leave immediately. He remained in the library a while longer, scanning the shelves, pulling out a book, glancing at it, putting it back. Then he left. Before extinguishing the candle, Clara thought about the letter. It was still on the table. James had forgotten it or left it deliberately. She did not take it. But the name Lady Caroline remained in her mind. Throughout the night, even before sleep came, her father had a saying, "To spend time worrying is to lose that time twice." It was true, but sometimes true things did not help. By the middle of the fourth week, Clara realized she could no longer use her afternoons for herself. This realization was not a complaint, just an observation, a record of change. Lessons ran from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The afternoons belonged to Clara, her books, her notes, her silence. That was how it had begun. But James came. Not every day. That told her something, though she did not yet want to name it. Twice a week, sometimes 3, each time with a different excuse. Asking about a word, requesting clarification about something from the previous lesson, looking for a book. The excuses were subtle, not too obvious, not too hidden, somewhere in between. And Clara did not refuse them, because she had no sufficient reason to refuse. He was only a student, asking questions. That was what she told herself. One Tuesday afternoon, James came in with a newspaper. The London Times, yesterday's edition. He placed it on the table, left it open. Clara looked. The article was on the 3rd page, Ireland. "The number cannot be right," James said, still standing, looking at the paper. 1 million people. This... He stopped. "This what?" Clara said. "It seems impossible." Clara looked at the paper, then at James. Its seeming impossible does not make it wrong. James sat down. This was unexpected. He usually remained standing, as if he had promised himself not to stay long. I understand. But 1 million, I cannot place that number in my mind. It remains abstract. It is normal for it to remain abstract, Clara said. Large numbers always are. The mind cannot carry them. She closed her book. When my father died, there were 6 more children in our village that same week. 13 in the neighboring village. I knew them. They had names, faces. Those are small numbers, but 1 million is only the sum of those small numbers. James heard this. He did not move past it. He let it sit. How did your father die? He asked at last. His voice was different. No edge from the lessons, only the question. Clara paused for a moment. No one had ever asked her so directly. Typhus. There was a sick family in the village. My father went to visit them. He carried the illness back with him. He was gone in 3 weeks. How old was he? 42. James looked at the window. Outside, November rain had begun, forming thin lines on the glass, each running downward along its own path. How old were you then? 19. Silence. Long, but not heavy. The kind that allows something to settle. At that age, James said, his voice low, turned inward from the window. I was in my 2nd year at Cambridge, arguing with my friends about which club I should join. Clara heard it as a confession. It had been said that way, not as an accusation, but as someone looking inward. It surprised her. Different lives, she said simply. Not fair. No. Clara opened her book again. She needed to do something with her hands, otherwise the conversation would go somewhere, and it should not go there yet. No. But sitting and grieving fairness does not stop me from reading. James laughed, unexpected, genuine, echoing against the library walls. Clara laughed too, brief, almost silent, but real. And something loosened in the room, something slight, almost imperceptible. But Clara felt it. After that day, the conversations in the library changed. Fewer excuses, less indirectness. James would come, sit, open a subject. Sometimes Clara would. The question of class in Stendhal, why Julian Sorel is disliked, because those who rise are seen as threats by those already above. Irish politics and how London newspapers wrote about it or did not. Once, James brought a speech his father had written in his youth for Parliament, read it aloud to Clara, and Clara stopped at one sentence. This argument contradicts itself. Do you see it? James saw it, and it unsettled him, but in the right way. These conversations were different from the lessons. In lessons, James was the student, Clara the teacher. The boundary was clear. But in the library, that boundary blurred. Sometimes James would say something and Clara would take note of it, inwardly, for her own thinking. Sometimes Clara would say something and James would remain silent, long, absorbing it. When Clara noticed this, she warned herself. Be careful. This is not work. The warning worked, during the day. Less so at night. On the Thursday of the 5th week, James had left his lesson notes on the table, Latin, corrected in Clara's handwriting. Clara was occupied with something else, and James flipped through the pages. Then he stopped. In the margin, beside a sentence from Caesar, a note had been written in small letters. Compare with Boswell's Latin, an interesting parallel. Why has no one written about this? James closed the notebook and looked at it. Clara was still occupied with something else. This note, James said. Is it for you or for me? Clara looked up. She saw the note, paused. Her face did not change, but something passed through her eyes, not being caught, but the awareness of a boundary. For myself, she said. I'm sorry. I sometimes jot down my own thoughts, Mixing them into the lessons isn't appropriate? No, James said. Keep doing it. I mean... He paused. I found it interesting. Clara looked at him. They're just scattered notes. You know, James said, your scattered notes are more interesting than my organized thoughts. Clara's face did not change. But something was fragile in that moment, very brief, quickly withdrawn. But Clara felt it, and James felt that she felt it. They both fell silent. I'll explain the Boswell reference, Clara said at last, taking the notebook. James sat down, listened. But that day, he struggled to finish his sentences, because part of his mind kept returning to that brief fragility, to whatever had passed through Clara's eyes, to whatever had been hidden again. He did not name it, not yet. In the 6th week, on Tuesday evening, Clara was writing a letter in her room. To a teacher she knew from Yorkshire, they wrote once a month. She set down her pen and looked out the window. The garden was dark, country dark, deep and without light. She thought, Christmas is 6 weeks away. Lady Caroline Vane will be here then. And James. What would James do? What was family pressure? What were society's expectations? Clara knew these better than anyone, because she stood outside them. They did not bind her, but she saw everything. Seeing was not always a good thing. She did not finish the letter that night. She went to bed and stared at the ceiling and remembered her father's voice. Knowing words is like carrying a weapon. No one sees it, but you feel safe. Safe. Clara thought about the word, about the distance between feeling safe and being safe. The difference was large, and somewhere in the middle of that distance, whether she wanted to admit it or not, stood James Ashworth. Edmund Ashworth's carriage arrived on the last Monday of November, in the afternoon. James was sitting in the library. The lessons were over. Clara should have left. But James had not moved. He had Stendhal in his hand, in French, reading to himself. He would not tell Clara that. There was no reason to. When he looked out the window, he saw the carriage. Black, large, familiar. His father's carriage. James closed the book. Edmund Ashworth was the final representative of an 80-year institution, or at least that was how he saw himself, and how those around him saw him. The Duke of Wexhall, 4th generation. Tall, upright, his gray hair always in place. James resembled him, or rather, James had been made to resemble him, which was an important distinction, and one James had understood years ago. Resemblance was chance. Being shaped was a project. His relationship with Edmund was not complicated. It appeared complicated from the outside, but from within, it was simple. Edmund knew what was right and said it. James usually agreed, sometimes did not, but measured the cost of disagreement and most often chose silence. It was not healthy, but it worked. Things that worked were not touched. He went downstairs and met his father as he entered. Father. James. Edmund handed his coat to Perkins, removed his gloves, looked around. The house looks well. Thank you. You do as well. Edmund looked at his son. The countryside suits you. James did not respond. He did not know whether the countryside suited him. But he felt that something was changing, and he would have to acknowledge it, whether he wanted to or not. Dinner was for 3. Edmund, Eleanor, James. A long table, 2 candles. Countryside darkness beyond the window. They had sat at this table hundreds of times over the years, and each sitting had its own rhythm. Edmund spoke. London news, Parliament, estate matters. Eleanor listened and occasionally steered with a sentence. James listened and responded when necessary. That night, after the first glass of wine, Edmund said, I have seen the Christmas list. It will be crowded. Eleanor's preference, he added, glancing at his wife. Not as criticism, but as a statement. We have not had a large Christmas in some time. Lady Ashworth said. The house deserves it. They're coming from Northumberland as well, Edmund said, turning to James. Direct, as always. Count Vane and his family. James turned his wine. I know. You remember Lady Caroline? Not a question. Edmund did not ask questions. He reminded. We met in London, twice. A graceful young woman. She is. Edmund said nothing more. But what he did not say remained on the table. Invisible but heavy. The expectation, a plan, something prepared not as a question, but as an answer. James felt it. Eleanor felt it too, but did not show it. The meal continued. James looked at his plate and thought, Lady Caroline Vane. She was beautiful. Denying it would be foolish. She was polite, from the right family. And between them, in those 2 London meetings, there had been nothing. Words, yes, the correct words, spoken in the correct places, but beneath them, emptiness. In the library, there was never emptiness. He pushed that thought away immediately. Clara saw Edmund Ashworth for the first time the next morning, in the corridor leading to the kitchen, by chance. The man was tall, upright, and when he saw Clara, he paused. Only for a second, then continued. But in that second, he had measured her from head to toe, not hostile, but assessing. Clara greeted him, inclined her head, and passed. That afternoon, Perkins came. Lord Edmund wishes to see you, Miss Merritt. Clara closed her book. When? Now, miss. Edmund's study was small but heavy. Dark oak walls, full shelves, a small window, a man behind the desk. Edmund did not stand. This was not disrespect, merely his manner. To receive people seated so that they could choose whether to remain standing or sit. Sit, Miss Merritt. Clara sat. Edmund did not speak for a while. He looked at the papers on his desk, picked up a pen, set it down. The silence was deliberate. Clara understood this and did not panic. She waited. I read one of your father's publications, Edmund said at last, years ago, on English local history, 2 volumes. It still stands on the 3rd shelf to the left. Something tightened inside Clara. I didn't know. Why would you? Edmund brought his fingers together on the desk. We corresponded. He was an intelligent man, a clear intelligence. Not the learned kind, the innate kind. Clara waited. How are the lessons? Well, my lord, Lord James learns quickly. That was not what I meant to ask. Clara paused. Edmund looked at her with that same measuring gaze, like in the corridor, but longer. I know my wife, he said, for 38 years, and I know why she brought you here, at least the reasons beyond French. Clara did not respond. There were no words for a response. You are your father's daughter, Edmund continued. That means something to me. He paused. To society, it means something else. Do you see the distance between the two? I do, Clara said. Her voice was steady. I always have. Edmund nodded. He said nothing more. This was more than approval, but Clara could not quite name what it was. Permission? Warning? Both? Continue your lessons, Edmund said and stood. Your father's books are on the left shelf. You may take them whenever you wish. Clara thanked him, closed the door. She stood in the corridor, took 2 deep breaths. The winter sun trembled over the stone outside, pale and real. She clasped her hands and thought, why had Edmund Ashworth had this conversation? To warn her, know your place, do not overstep? Or on the contrary, had he opened a door with a very careful motion? She had no answer. But somewhere inside her, in a place she did not want to notice, something small had warmed. That evening, James came to the library. Clara expected it. She had not thought he would stay away despite his father's presence. Perhaps because of it. He sat, said nothing for a while. Clara said nothing either, She waited, as she had learned since the third week. "He spoke to you?" James said at last. Not a question. "Yes." "What did he say?" Clara thought for a moment. "He spoke of your father's books. And I don't think there's any need for me to say more." James heard that. Understood. Edmund had spoken. The content mattered. But Clara would not share it, and that mattered too. He stood, walked to the window. The garden outside was dark. The November cold had slightly fogged the glass. His back was to Clara. "Lady Vane will be here at Christmas," he said. His voice was flat, but too flat, deliberately flattened. "I know. My mother thinks... James." He stopped. Clara had used his name for the first time. Not my lord, not lord. James. He turned. Clara was looking at her book, not at him. But her voice was clear. "We don't need to have this conversation. Not yet." Not yet. The words remained in the room, in the air between them. James said nothing. But he did not leave either. He sat across the table and took a book, opened it. Whether he read or not was unclear, but he stayed. Clara stayed too. Outside, the November wind moved the ivy. Inside, 2 candles burned, and both of them sat in silence, with separate books in the same room. But the silence was not empty. It was full, carrying something, and they both knew it, and neither of them said it. Not yet. The guests began arriving on December 18th. First, the nearby neighbors, 2 carriages, before noon. Then those from London, larger carriages, more luggage, more noise. And last, on the afternoon of the second day, the carriage from Northumberland. Count Vane's, black, large, bearing its crest. Clara saw it from the library window. To avoid seeing it, she would have had to step away from the window, and stepping away would have felt like revealing herself. So she looked, steady, calm, as if watching something in the garden. The Count stepped out first, then an older lady, the Countess most likely, then a young man, presumably the son. And last of all, Caroline Vane stepped down. She was beautiful. Clara did not deny it. Denying it would have been foolish. Tall, dark-haired, her movements natural. Not showy, but practiced. The movements of someone who had spent years in the right places. As she approached the house, she lifted her head and looked at the facade. Just as Clara had done on her first day. But Clara had evaluated the architecture. Caroline Vane was evaluating the house. The difference was small, but important. Clara stepped away from the window and returned to her book. The page did not change. Her eyes moved over the letters, but the words did not form. She closed the book, opened it again, closed it once more. She took her father's inkwell, placed it on the table, put it back. Enough, she told herself. This is foolish. Knowing it was foolish did not stop it. But at least it gave it a name. For 3 nights, Bradwell House transformed. The ballroom lit up each evening, candlelight, music, laughter. The dining table lengthened, guests filled it, wine flowed. Clara was in none of it. This was expected. It was the rule. Governesses and tutors remained in the background at large gatherings, invisible. Clara was used to being invisible. But this time, invisibility felt different. Heavier, narrower. Because downstairs in that bright hall, James was there. And beside him, Lady Caroline Vane. And Clara knew it because she heard it from Perkins. Felt it in the sounds passing through the corridors. The first night, she sat in her room and tried to read. It did not work. The second night, she went to bed early. Sleep did not come. The third night, Christmas Eve, she went down to the library, lit a candle, opened a book, sat. The waltz drifted up from below, steady, predictable, with the emotionless precision of a metronome. Clara tried not to hear it. She failed, but she tried. James lasted 40 minutes that evening. The food was good, the music was good, the guests were polite, the conversations manageable. And Lady Caroline Vane beside him was indeed graceful and indeed beautiful, and indeed smiled at him politely whenever he said something. The problem was this: after James spoke, the smile came. Every time, the right size, the right warmth. And James could not see what lay behind that smile. Was it empty, full, real, learned? He could not tell. It was simply the correct smile, and correct things were always invisible. In the library, Clara never smiled, or rarely did. And when she did, it came from unexpected places. In the middle of a sentence, in the margin of a book, at the moment an argument collapsed. None of them were the right size. All of them were real. James pushed the thought under the table, took a sip of wine, turned to Lady Caroline. "What is Northumberland like this season?" he asked. "Cold," Lady Caroline said, smiling. "But beautiful. The snow came early this year. It must be." "Have you never been?" "Once, as a child." "You should come again." The smile, the correct size. James smiled too, the correct size, and after a while he felt his father's gaze from across the table, approving, silent, the kind that records a calculation confirmed. At 40 minutes, James stood, excused himself, and left. When he opened the library door, Clara was there. She was reading by candlelight. A dark blue dress. He had never seen it before, not black this time. She looked up. James stepped inside. They looked at each other, and neither of them appeared surprised, which was strange. They both should have been, but they were not. "You're escaping," Clara said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," said James. "You?" "I was never there." James stepped in, sat across the table, like in lessons, but different. The waltz still drifted up from below, steady and predictable and distant. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was full, as always, but heavier tonight, carrying less empty space. "I spoke with Lady Vane for 2 hours," James said at last. His voice was low. "For all those 2 hours, I kept thinking of a sentence from Stendhal." Clara did not close her book, but her finger paused on the page. "Which sentence?" she asked. Her voice was even, too even, carefully flattened. "Aimer, c'est avoir peur. To love is to be afraid." Silence. The waltz continued. Somewhere, a curtain closed. The sound dimmed slightly. Clara closed her book, slowly, deliberately. Then she looked at James, directly with that evaluating gaze. But this time there was no defense behind it, only the gaze itself. "James," she said. Again, his name. "We don't need to have this conversation." "I know." "If we do, some things will change." "I know. And the cost of those changes will not be equal for both of us." This mattered, and Clara's voice carried it, not fragile, but clear. "You will not be dismissed. I will. That is reality." James heard this sentence. He did not move past it, did not allow himself to. He sat with it for a moment, carried it. "I know," he said, "and it is not fair. And I do not want to continue by ignoring that unfairness. Wanting is not enough. No." James stood. "But doing is." Clara stood as well. The table was between them. There had always been something between them. The table, the books, the words, the difference in class. Tonight the table was there, and James walked around it. Clara did not step back, did not retreat. She waited. "For 6 weeks, Clara said, her voice low but steady. "You have gone back and forth between treating me as a teacher and as something else. I have done the same. I'm aware. And your awareness does not solve everything. No, but we have to begin somewhere." James stopped, one step away from her. "I will speak with my father." Clara had not expected that. Tonight? In the morning. Not tonight. I want to think tonight. Clara looked at him. A long, real look, hiding nothing, for the first time, exactly like that. It will not be easy to convince Edmund Ashworth. I know. And society... Clara. She stopped. James had said her name, for the first time, mirroring what she had done before. Not my lady, not miss. Clara. I know society, James said. And I know your father's books stand on Edmund's shelves. And I think I now understand why my mother brought you here. Clara paused. What do you mean? Lady Ashworth does not hire a governess for French lessons, James said slowly, discovering it as he spoke. She never has. She did not wait years for my French to be dreadful. That is an excuse. But an excuse for what? Clara had thought about this. She had not wanted to, but she had. That conversation in Edmund's study, that measuring gaze, that sentence, "You are your father's daughter," that means something to me. Go, Clara said. Think. Speak to your father in the morning. And then, Clara paused for a moment. Then, very briefly, almost invisible but real, she smiled. Then come here, tell me. James left. The door closed. The waltz still drifted up from below, but Clara no longer heard it, or she did, but it felt different, less unbearable. She sat before the candle and opened her book. This time the letters came together, the words flowed. She read, truly read, until the candle burned low and went out. James did not sleep that night. He did not even undress. He sat on the edge of his bed, coat still on, and looked out into the darkness of Bradwell. The darkness of the countryside is deep. There's no light, no sound, only time passing, and a person remains alone inside their thoughts, unable to escape. He thought of Lady Caroline Vane, the correct smile, the correct answers, the correct family. He thought of everything that was correct, and nothing inside him warmed. That, in itself, was an answer. He thought of his father, Edmund's approving gaze, that silent calculation at dinner. Edmund was not wrong. That was what had to be understood. Edmund truly knew what was right, within his own world. But the distance between that world and what James felt inside himself was very clear tonight. Visible, tangible. He thought of Clara. He had left her for last. But leaving her for last did not hide anything. He had been thinking of her all night. Everything else had been orbiting around her like planets. He thought of that look in the library, a look that hid nothing, that did not smooth itself into the proper shape. And he said to himself, for the first time almost aloud, nearly speaking it, I love this woman. The words remained in the room. Nothing changed. The walls were the same walls, the window the same window, the same darkness outside. But inside something settled, something that once spoken could not be taken back. At 5 a.m, he rose, washed his face, and went downstairs. Edmund ate breakfast at 8 every morning, but he entered his study at 6:30. James knew this. He had learned it over the years, memorized his father's routine since childhood, like a sailor reads the wind. He knocked on the door at 7:45. Edmund was inside, at his desk, with his letters. James. He was not surprised. James had never seen Edmund surprised. Early? Yes. James stepped in. Close the door. I won't sit. Edmund set down his pen, looked at him. James had constructed this entire conversation in his mind the night before. How he would begin, how he would arrange it, where he would take it. But now, facing his father, everything he had prepared fell away, and only the truth remained. I cannot marry Lady Vane, he said. I should have had this conversation earlier. I am late and I apologize, for you, for my mother, and for Lady Vane. But to continue would not be honest. Edmund did not move. Go on. James took a breath. Miss Merritt? Silence. Long, heavy, the kind in which Edmund weighed everything. James waited. He did not defend, did not explain, did not add. He had said what needed to be said. Edmund stood, walked to the window, the winter garden of Bradwell, frozen grass, pale sunlight just rising. His back was to James, and James recognized that back. Decisions were made in that posture, before words, internally. Arthur Merritt, Edmund said, his voice low but clear. An intelligent man, 10 years older than me, but reading one of his letters could make me feel 10 years younger. He paused. Is his daughter the same? James answered without thinking. More. Edmund turned, looked at James, with that measuring gaze, long, missing nothing. Then something softened in his face, very slightly, almost imperceptibly. James had seen it only once before, the year his mother fell ill, the morning she recovered. Society will talk, Edmund said. I know. Not for you. For her. You will be forgotten in a year. She will not. I know. James's voice did not waver. That's why I will protect her. But to do that, I must stand fully within that society, not by retreating, but by facing it. Edmund looked at him for a while, then returned to his desk, sat, picked up his pen. James could not tell whether this was rejection or acceptance. You will write an apology letter to Lady Vane tomorrow, Edmund said, looking at the paper. I will write to the Count. This must be concluded properly. James could hardly speak. Father, and your mother. Edmund set down his pen, looked at James. Your mother did not bring that girl here without my knowledge. James froze. What? Something passed over Edmund's face again. That small thing, clearer this time, something James could name. A smile. The smile of the Duke of Bradwell, Edmund Ashworth, that measured heavy man. Sometimes, Edmund said, the most intelligent people are the ones who speak the least. James paused. Are you saying that to me? I am saying it about your mother. Edmund returned to his letters. Go now. Clara began packing her suitcase at 7 in the morning. This was not a sudden decision. It had crystallized inside her at midnight as she went up to her room after the candle burned out. James would speak to his father. That was brave, real, and Clara believed it. But believing and waiting were different things. Waiting was passive, and Clara had forbidden herself from being passive ever since that corridor in Cheltenham. If James failed to convince his father, and he might, that possibility was real. Clara would be dismissed. Packing her suitcase in advance was preparing for that possibility, not weakness, but practicality. That was what she told herself. It was true, but not the only truth. Leaving was also something else. To avoid seeing, if James heard no from his father and Clara were there, in the library, waiting, that would be unbearable. Packing prevented that scene. She wrapped her books, placed her father's inkwell at the top, locked the cases, put on her coat, her hat, went to the library one last time to take the candle. It had burned out the night before, only the holder remained. She took it, looked at the table. Stendhal was still there, where James had left it. She did not take it. She carried her suitcases to the door and waited. She did not fully know what she was waiting for. Perkins, the carriage, news, someone. There was something quiet inside her, neither fear nor hope. Something in between, a state without a name. James did not run to the library. He wanted to, but did not, because he knew Clara would find that urgency beneath him, and the thought almost made him laugh, alone on the stairs. He walked, steady steps, holding his breath. He opened the library door. Clara was there, but not at the table. By the door, with her suitcases, her coat, her hat, ready as if to leave. James saw it, and something inside him tightened, then loosened, because Clara's eyes were fixed on the door, and when he entered, those eyes changed. The look of someone seeing something unexpected, needing one more second to believe it. "You were leaving?" James said. "Yes." Clara was honest. That was part of her. "I wanted to be prepared for the possibilities." "Which possibility?" "The bad one." James walked to the table, picked up Stendhal, looked at it, set it down, then turned to Clara. "I spoke to my father." Clara waited. "He closed the matter with Lady Vane. I will write a letter, and he will write to the Count." James paused. "And my mother had more in mind than French lessons when she brought you here." He said it himself. "So your father's books are not on Edmund's shelves by accident." And Lady Ashworth did not wait 8 weeks to hire a governess. Clara stood still for a moment. Then the laughter came. She could not stop it, did not even try. Real, free, like something she had held back for weeks, finally breaking loose. It echoed against the library walls and filled the room. "Your mother," she said, her voice still unsteady, "is a far more intelligent woman than I am. We agree on that." Clara's laughter faded, her face settled, but her eyes did not. The fragile thing that always hid immediately, this time remained. James saw it and named it inwardly, trust. Clara trusted, not fully yet, not unconditionally, but enough. "Society will talk," Clara said. Her voice was realistic, neither pessimistic nor naive. "You know that." "I know. You are your father's daughter. That means something to me." Clara paused. "That is your father's sentence." "Yes, but I am saying it too." The table was between them, as always. This time James walked around it. Clara did not step back, did not leave. She waited. And James stopped in front of her, one step away, and looked, without the correct measure, without learning, without rules. "Are the lessons over for you?" he asked. Clara looked at him, a long, real look, hiding nothing now. Then she looked at her suitcase, by the door, ready, pointing toward a departure. Then back at James. She unbuttoned her coat. One button, slowly. "Not yet," she said. "I still have much to teach." After a while, the door opened, and Lady Eleanor Ashworth entered. James and Clara were sitting on opposite sides of the table, with Stendhal between them, open, marked at a page. From the outside, it looked like a lesson. Perhaps it still was. Eleanor entered the room, looked at them both, and smiled. That small, knowing smile of hers, never fully explained. "Breakfast is ready," she said. "You are both expected. Both of you." They both heard it. They both understood what it meant. Eleanor left without closing the door. Clara closed the book. James stood. As he reached the door, he paused, turned. "Clara." "James." Nothing more. Names, exchanged, equal in weight. No my lord, no miss, just names. And that was enough, for now, for that morning, for that beginning. Outside, the winter sun of Bradwell trembled over the stone. The garden was frozen, but the ivy still held to the walls. The leaves gone, but the roots intact. Spring would come. It came even here. It came everywhere. And when it did, everything would look different, clearer, more possible. But for now, it was winter. And winter was enough. Society talked. Edmund had foreseen it. James knew it. Clara expected it. And still, the first year was heavy. Whispers moved through London drawing rooms. A few invitations were withdrawn. An old friend stopped offering greetings. Clara bore it more calmly than James. She had known the texture of those whispers since childhood. They were nothing new. James learned. Slowly, sometimes with anger, sometimes simply by enduring. But he learned. They married in May, 1849. A small ceremony in Bradwell Stone Church. The guest list short but true. Eleanor sat in the front row and did not cry. She only watched, with that knowing gaze, and that was enough. Edmund died at the end of 1850. His heart sudden in his sleep. James inherited the dukedom, and it was heavy, heavier than he had expected. But Clara was there, bringing coffee at 3 in the morning when James sat at his desk, reading parliamentary papers, seeing when an argument collapsed, and saying it, always saying it, without ever offering the correct-sized smiles. Bradwell's library grew that year. Arthur Merritt's 2 volumes found their place on the left shelf, and beside them, Clara's own notes, irregular, scattered, the best kind. When they stepped into the garden in spring, James and Clara on the stone steps of Bradwell, the sun just rising, Clara said something. It was not important, just an ordinary observation about the ivy spreading over the west wing. James answered. Then they fell silent, and the silence was full, as always. But this time it held no fear, no calculation, no weight. There was only morning, and Bradwell, and the 2 of them. It was enough. It was always enough. Thank you for being here and following this story all the way through. It means a lot to have you with us until the very end. I hope the story stayed with you in some way, wherever you're listening from. Let us know your city and what you thought about the story. We read every comment. We're always working to improve this channel and bring you even better stories. If you'd like to support us and be part of that journey, you can join the channel as a member for a small fee. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next.